She ripped the check in half. Right there, in the middle of her own boardroom, in front of 11 executives who had spent 6 months negotiating that deal. $200 million. Torn in two. Because she could. That's who Vivian Sterling was. But on a quiet California beach, one ordinary man broke, exhausted and visible to the world, said 4 words that shattered everything she believed about herself. "You're blocking the view." Not her power, not her money, not her empire, just 4 words, and she never recovered from them. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. The morning Vivian Sterling destroyed a $200 million deal, she did it without blinking. She walked into Sterling Logistics headquarters at 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes before anyone else arrived. That was intentional. She liked the building when it was still quiet before the coffee machine started hissing, and the elevators started groaning, and people began filling the hallways with their noise and their needs and their endless requests for her attention. She liked the building when it still belonged only to her. Her assistant Marcus was already waiting by her office door. He was 26, efficient and smart enough to understand that his job security depended entirely on anticipating what she needed before she knew she needed it. He held a black coffee in one hand and a thick folder in the other. Carrington Group called again. They want to move the signing to this afternoon. They can want whatever they like. Ms. Sterling, the board is expecting. Marcus. She didn't slow down. Do I look like someone who responds well to pressure? He knew better than to answer that. She took the coffee without breaking stride and pushed open the double doors to her corner office. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides. The Pacific Ocean, visible in the distance. A desk made of reclaimed wood from a demolished lighthouse. Something she'd paid $40,000 for, because she liked what it represented. She stood at the window for exactly 90 seconds. That was her ritual. 90 seconds of silence before the world started demanding things from her. The Carrington deal had taken 6 months. 22 meetings. Hundreds of hours of negotiation. Her legal team had worked through 3 consecutive weekends. The deal would have expanded Sterling Logistics into the Pacific Northwest, a market she'd been targeting for 4 years. And Thomas Carrington had made one mistake. He'd called her sweetheart during the final review call. Not as a compliment, as a correction. She'd pushed back on a clause in Section 14 regarding liability caps, and he'd said his exact words, "Now, sweetheart, let's not get lost in the weeds here." She'd said nothing. She'd let the call finish. She'd let her legal team send over the final documents. She'd let Thomas Carrington fly his entire executive team to San Francisco first class and put them up at the Four Seasons. And then the next morning, she'd walked into her own boardroom, picked up the signed contract sitting on the mahogany table, and torn it in half. Nobody moved. 11 people sat around that table, and nobody made a sound. "Send him home," she said, and removed the Carrington file from the server. "Vivian," her CFO started. "Remove the file." That was Thursday. By Friday afternoon, she was sitting in the back of a black SUV with her phone turned off, heading south on the Pacific Coast Highway toward a stretch of beach she'd discovered 3 years ago and had never told anyone about. She needed 2 days of nothing. No board meetings, no acquisition targets, no executives tiptoeing around the truth because they were afraid of her reaction. No one calling her sweetheart. No one calling her anything at all. Just the ocean. Just the sound of waves that didn't care who she was. The house wasn't one of her homes. That was the point. Vivian owned 4 properties, a penthouse in San Francisco, a brownstone in Manhattan, a villa in Tuscany, and a modern compound in Malibu that architectural magazines had photographed twice. But the rental in this part of the coast was anonymous and small and completely invisible to the world. 3 bedrooms, a screened porch, a kitchen that was perfectly adequate if you didn't have opinions about kitchens. She'd rented it under a different name for the past 2 years. She arrived before sunset, dismissed the driver, and stood on the porch with a glass of wine she barely touched. The ocean was doing what it always did. Moving, breathing, utterly indifferent, and she found herself grateful for that indifference in a way she didn't know how to articulate. She woke Saturday morning feeling for the first time all week like an actual human being. She put on her swimsuit. Italian structured the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent, pulled her dark hair back, and walked down to the shore. The beach was quiet. A few families farther down. Some joggers. A couple of teenagers taking photographs of the waves. Nothing that required anything from her. She walked slowly, letting the sand work between her toes, feeling the particular pleasure of being completely unrecognized. In San Francisco, she couldn't walk 2 blocks without someone knowing her face. Here she was, just a woman in a nice swimsuit, and that anonymity felt like its own kind of luxury. She'd walked maybe a quarter mile when she saw him, sitting on a faded blue beach towel about 30 feet from the waterline. She noticed him, the way she noticed everything, quickly, systematically cataloging details without meaning to, because that was how her mind had been trained to work. Young black man, probably mid-30s, faded gray t-shirt with a university logo so worn she couldn't read the name anymore. Athletic shorts. Old Nike sneakers sitting beside him on the towel, which struck her as slightly odd, who wore sneakers to the beach. A beat-up blue and white cooler that had clearly seen better years sat to his left. He wasn't looking at the ocean. He was watching a little boy. The child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, was crouched about 15 feet closer to the water, intensely focused on building something in the wet sand. He had a red plastic shovel and a look of absolute concentration on his face, the kind of look that only small children and the truly obsessed can produce. Vivian stopped. She wasn't sure why she stopped. Maybe it was because the man on the towel was so completely still, in a way that felt almost jarring, like a person who had learned the specific value of not wasting a single moment. Most men at the beach were moving, on phones, checking things, doing the performance of relaxation without actually relaxing. This man wasn't performing anything. He was just watching his son. And he was smiling in the quiet, private way that people smile when they think nobody is looking. Then he looked at her, not the way men usually looked at her. Not with recognition or interest or that particular combination of intimidation and desire that wealth tended to produce in people. He looked at her the way someone looks at a stranger who has stopped unexpectedly in front of them on a sidewalk, mildly curious, mildly confused, waiting to understand the situation. And then he looked back at his son. Just like that. Dismissed. Vivian Sterling could not remember the last time someone had dismissed her. Something moved in her chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. Not anger exactly. Not hurt. Something smaller and stranger than either of those things. She was used to being seen. She was used to people adjusting themselves in response to her presence. She had spent so many years in rooms where her arrival changed the temperature, where people straightened their posture and cleared their throats and chose their words more carefully, that she had begun, without fully realizing it, to believe that was simply how the world responded to her. Always. Everywhere. This man had looked at her for 3 seconds and then decided his son was more interesting. She walked toward him. She wasn't sure what she was going to say. She told herself she was simply curious, that the analyst's brain she'd been running on overdrive all week simply wanted to understand the anomaly. She wasn't offended. She was curious. She stopped a few feet away, crossed her arms, put on the smile she used in rooms where she needed to establish something quickly, and said, "Enjoying the view." She expected a couple of things. She expected him to look up at her with that slightly startled expression people used when they realized they'd been caught. She expected some version of sheepishness, maybe a fumbled compliment, maybe that particular combination of embarrassed and flattered that men often produced around her. She did not expect what actually happened. He looked up at her, unhurried calm, taking his time, and said, "Actually, you're standing in front of it." She blinked. He pointed past her toward the little boy and his sandcastle. "My son's been talking about building that thing since Tuesday. We've been waiting all week for a Saturday we could actually get down here, so if you don't mind." He tilted his head just slightly. "You're blocking the only view that matters to me right now." The ocean kept moving. The little boy kept building, completely oblivious to any of this. And Vivian Sterling stood there for a moment that lasted much longer than a moment, with her arms still crossed and her designer swimsuit and her 4 properties, and her torn-up $200 million deal, and felt for reasons she absolutely could not explain, like she was the one who had just made a mistake. She stepped to the side. "Sorry," she said. She never said sorry. He nodded, no big deal, and looked back at his son. She should have walked away. That was the rational thing to do. That was the thing that made sense. Take her bruised whatever, this was that wasn't. Quite pride and walk back down the beach and find something else to look at. Instead, she sat down in the sand about 10 feet away. She didn't fully understand why she did this either. Later, when she tried to reconstruct that morning in her mind, she couldn't find a clean explanation. She would tell herself she was tired, and the sand was warm, and she hadn't intended to sit right there. It just happened. But the truth, which she would take longer to admit, was simpler. She wanted to understand someone who had looked at her like she was ordinary, and she wanted to do it without making it obvious. The little boy looked up and noticed her immediately. "Hi. Hi," she said. "I'm building a castle." "I can see that. It looks complicated." "It is complicated." He said it with great seriousness, turning back to his work. "The walls keep falling down because the sand is too wet. What if you moved back a little? The sand might be drier farther from the water." He considered this, looked at his father. His father shrugged. "Your call, buddy," and the boy scooted back about 3 feet, tested the sand with his shovel, and then looked at her with enormous eyes. "That's better." "Good call," his father said. And then he looked at her. Not the earlier look, the waiting to understand the situation look. Something a little warmer than that. Not much, but a little. "He's been trying to build one of those for 2 months, he said. "Every time we got close to making it down here, something came up. Work. Something like that." He stretched his legs out in the sand, leaned back on his hands. "I'm Adrian." "Vivian." "You from around here, Vivian?" "San Francisco. Just down for the weekend." "Nice." He said it simply, without the particular tone people used when they were fishing for more information about her, and she found that she appreciated it more than made sense. "You, about an hour north, drove down this morning." "Worth the drive." He glanced at his son, who was now singing quietly to himself while he built some song Adrian clearly recognized, because a small smile crossed his face. Every single mile. She should have left after 20 minutes. She stayed for almost 2 hours. She didn't understand this about herself. Vivian Sterling did not linger. Vivian Sterling moved with purpose from one moment to the next, always with a destination, always with a plan. She did not sit in the sand next to strangers watching small children construct increasingly ambitious architectural projects. But here she was. Noah, she learned his name, when Adrian called out to him to stay back from the waves, was one of those children who seemed to be operating at a slightly different frequency than the adults around him. He asked questions without embarrassment. He changed topics without warning. He announced discoveries about the sand and the water, and a passing seagull, with the absolute certainty of someone who had never been told that their observations weren't worth sharing. Adrian answered every single one, even when he was clearly mid-thought, even when the questions made no logical sense. He just folded himself into Noah's frequency without any visible effort, like someone fluent in a second language. "Dad, why does the ocean never stop?" "Because it doesn't know how." "Does it get tired?" "Nope." "What if it did? Then we'd have a problem." Noah thought about this for a long moment, apparently found it satisfactory, and went back to his castle. Vivian watched this exchange and felt something she couldn't name settle somewhere in her chest. She spent her days surrounded by people who performed intelligence, who chose their words for maximum effect, who framed everything as a demonstration of competence, who were so busy being impressive that they never actually said anything real. And here was this man in a worn-out shirt, having an honest conversation with a 5-year-old about the ocean's fatigue levels, and it was somehow the most real thing she'd heard all week. "He's a thinker," she said. "Hasn't stopped since he learned to talk." Adrian's voice carried an exhaustion that didn't match his expression, like the tiredness lived somewhere deep, and he'd learned to keep it from reaching his face. "Gets it from his mother." Past tense. She heard it, but didn't ask. Whatever the story was, it lived in that past tense, and she wasn't going to dig into it. You do this often. Drive an hour for the beach. When I can. He paused. He needs days that are just days, where nothing is about to fall apart, where it's just him and sand and that's enough. Another pause. I try to give him those when I can. Vivian looked at Noah, who had now enlisted a passing 3-year-old to assist with the castle construction project, conducting operations with tremendous diplomatic confidence. Looks like he can make friends anywhere. He has absolutely no idea that strangers are supposed to be intimidating. Adrian laughed, a real one from somewhere genuine. I'm not sure whether to be worried about that or grateful. Grateful, she said without thinking. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. I think so too. The next morning she saw them at the small outdoor restaurant at the north end of the beach. It was the kind of place that served breakfast all day. Plastic chairs, paper menus, a woman behind the counter, who seemed to be handling everything herself. The kind of place Vivian Sterling would not normally eat. She was there because she'd woken up craving something ordinary, and her rental house had exactly 3 things in the refrigerator, and none of them were breakfast. She ordered without looking at the menu. Coffee, eggs, toast. She was reaching for her coffee when she heard it. A quiet, flat tone. Declined. She looked over without meaning to. Adrian was at the counter, his wallet still open, looking down at the credit card in his hand, with an expression she recognized not as embarrassment. It was past embarrassment, past that particular sting, but as the quiet, well-practiced resignation of someone for whom this was not the first time, and probably would not be the last. Noah was sitting at the table behind him, swinging his legs, studying the paper placemat. I'm sorry, Adrian said to the woman at the counter. Could you try it one more time? The woman tried it. She met his eyes after, and gave him the tiniest, kindest shake of her head. I'm sorry, honey. No, it's okay. He put the card back. Thank you. He turned around, and for just a second, 1 second before he walked back to Noah, his face held something Vivian recognized from her own life. The particular look of someone calculating, measuring, managing not to let the ceiling fall. Then he sat down beside his son. Noah looked up from the placemat. Dad, can I get the pancakes? Adrian leaned down to him, voice low and steady, and said, Change of plans, buddy. We're gonna head out, and I'll make you something at home. Something special. Noah's face flickered with the beginning of disappointment. But I know, but sometimes plans change and we roll with it, right? That's what we do. The little boy looked at his father for a moment, reading him. Children always know more than they let on, and Noah clearly knew something had happened, even if he didn't have the words for it. Okay, he said finally. Can you make the French toast, the good kind with the cinnamon? The exact kind. Vivian was already standing. She wasn't thinking. That was the truth of it. She moved before she finished a single conscious thought, crossed the small space, and put her card on the counter. I've got them, she said to the woman. The woman looked between her and Adrian. Adrian turned. There was a moment that lasted less time than it took to breathe. No. His voice was completely even. No anger in it, just a line in the ground. I appreciate it, but no. It's just breakfast. I know what it is. He looked at her with something she didn't expect. Not hostility, not wounded pride, something more deliberate than either of those things. I don't want my son to grow up watching his dad let people feel sorry for him. Even nice people. A pause. That's not what I'm teaching him. Vivian pulled her card back. She didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say. She watched him take Noah's hand, thank the woman at the counter with complete dignity, and walk out into the morning sun. And Vivian Sterling, who had ripped a $200 million check in half without breaking a sweat, stood in a tiny beach restaurant, holding her credit card, with her hand not entirely steady, understanding. For the first time in she couldn't remember how long that she had just been put in her place. Not cruelly, not deliberately, just honestly. And somehow, that was harder to absorb than anything anyone had said to her in years. She found herself watching them for the rest of that morning. Not in a strange way. They stayed on the beach. She stayed on the beach. She told herself she just happened to be nearby. She was very good at telling herself reasonable things. What she saw in the next 3 hours rewired something in her. She watched Adrian pull a slightly crushed peanut butter sandwich from the cooler and hand half to Noah without any presentation, without any apology for what it was. Noah ate it like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. She watched Adrian take off his sneakers and roll up his shorts and walk into the shallow water beside Noah, both of them shrieking at the cold. Adrian laughing harder than she'd seen him laugh all day. A real unguarded laugh that meant he'd forgotten for a minute whatever weight he'd been carrying. She watched Noah find a particularly good shell and bring it to Adrian with 2 hands the way children offer things that matter to them. And she watched Adrian receive it with matching seriousness, turning it over, examining it, telling Noah it was a good one, a keeper. She watched Adrian check his phone twice, with an expression that was brief and contained and gone before Noah could notice it. She watched him eat nothing. He'd given Noah the sandwich and the apple and the small bag of crackers from the cooler, and he himself ate nothing. And when Noah offered him the last cracker, Adrian said he wasn't hungry with such total conviction that Noah believed him. Vivian Sterling had spent 15 years in rooms with people who were very good at performing things they didn't feel. She was excellent at detecting the performance. She'd built a company on being able to tell faster than anyone when someone was being real and when they were putting on a show. Adrian wasn't performing contentment. He wasn't pretending the day was more than it was. He was just present. Entirely present. In a way that Vivian realized with a discomfort she wasn't prepared for, that she could not remember being in years. When had she last done one thing? When had she last been in a single moment, not managing 3 parallel tracks in the back of her mind, not running calculations about what came next, not already halfway to the next thing before the current thing was finished? She genuinely couldn't remember, and this man exhausted broke, holding a crumpled peanut butter sandwich was doing it effortlessly, because he had no other choice, because this moment with his son was the only thing he had and he was making it into enough. She watched them pack up to leave in the late afternoon. Adrian shook the sand out of the towel. Noah carried the empty cooler with exaggerated effort. They were bickering cheerfully about something she was too far away to hear the words, just the rhythm of it, the easy back and forth of 2 people who knew each other's timing completely. Just before they reached the path back to the parking lot, Noah turned around. He spotted her. "Bye, Vivian." He waved with his whole arm. She waved back. Adrian glanced over his shoulder. A small nod. Nothing more. Then they were gone. Vivian sat in the sand for a long time after that. The ocean kept moving. The sun dropped lower. A few families picked up and left. Kids who'd been building their own sandcastles abandoned them to the tide. She sat there thinking about a man who wouldn't let her buy him breakfast. About a little boy who carried an empty cooler like it was treasure. About how full of herself she had been when she walked across that beach yesterday morning and expected a stranger to be embarrassed that she'd caught him looking. "You're blocking the only view that matters to me right now." She'd thought when he said it that it was a put-down. Some kind of calculated line designed to turn the tables. But he hadn't meant it that way at all. He'd just been telling the truth. And she had spent so long in rooms where nobody told her the truth that she hadn't even recognized it when she heard it. She drove back to San Francisco on Sunday. She turned her phone back on somewhere around Santa Cruz and watched 2 days of messages fill her screen, her CFO asking about the Carrington fallout, her legal team flagging 3 issues, Marcus checking in with a careful non-committal text that said, "Hope you're well, no rush and meant the building is on fire, please come back." She answered none of them. She drove, and she thought about a man who knew her name only as Vivian, who had no idea she owned a company with 11,000 employees and a market cap that put her on lists she'd stopped reading because they made her feel oddly hollow. Who had looked at her like she was ordinary. Who had looked at her, she understood now the most accurately that anyone had in a very long time. She got back to her penthouse at 7 in the evening. Stood in the living room with its precise furniture and its art she'd bought because advisors told her it was significant. Made herself dinner from things in the refrigerator that had been selected and stocked by someone else. Sat at the table alone. And thought about Noah offering his last cracker. and thought about Adrian's face when that card got declined. Not shame, not defeat, but that quiet, unbreakable thing that lived underneath both of those and wouldn't bend. She opened her laptop. She didn't go to the board reports or the acquisition files or the 12 emails from her legal team. She opened the Sterling Logistics employee database. She typed Brooks Adrian. She stared at the results for a long time. The name came back immediately. Adrian James Brooks. Facility Sterling Logistics, Pacific Coast Distribution Center Unit 7. Classification Equipment, Maintenance Technician, Level 3. Employment start date, 17 months prior. She read it twice. Her facility. Her company. He was her employee. She sat with this information for a long time, not entirely sure what to do with it. There was something uncomfortable about it. Not wrong exactly, but complicated in a way she hadn't anticipated. She had stumbled onto a beach and met a man and found him impossible to stop thinking about. And now she was finding out he worked for her, and the geometry of that felt strange in ways she was still working out. She closed the laptop, opened it again, pulled up Unit 7's operational records. Sterling Logistics operated 14 distribution centers along the California coast. Unit 7 was in the second tier of performance, consistently meeting targets, occasionally exceeding them, but not in the top cluster. She knew the facility the way she knew all of them, as a set of numbers. Throughput rates, error percentages, labor costs per unit, the metrics that told her whether something needed attention. She'd never been inside it. She'd never been inside any of them, actually. She had regional managers for that. She had operations officers and logistics directors, and a whole chain of capable people between her and the actual physical work of moving things from one place to another. That was how companies scaled. That was how you went from a small regional carrier to a billion-dollar enterprise. You systematized, you delegated, you stopped doing things yourself and started managing people who did things. She believed this. She'd built her life on it. But at 7:30 on a Sunday evening, in her precisely appointed penthouse, she found herself staring at the operational records for Unit 7 and realizing that she had no idea what any of those numbers actually looked like in the real world. What they meant to the people producing them. What it cost a person to show up at a facility and generate throughput metrics night after night. She thought about the gray shirt, the worn sneakers, by the towel. The card that came back declined. She thought about a man who fixed equipment for her company and couldn't afford to buy his son pancakes. She closed the laptop again. This time she left it closed, but not because she was done thinking about it, because she had made a decision. She was going to go to Unit 7. Not as a CEO doing a facility inspection. Not as a name on a letterhead that made supervisors nervous. She was going quietly in the way she'd learned to be anonymous on that beach. And she was going to see what she had built from the inside. She was going to see what the numbers actually were. She owed herself that. She suspected she might owe Adrian Brooks a great deal more. She slept without setting an alarm for the first time in 4 years. She woke at 5 a.m. anyway. Her body didn't know how to do anything else, and lay there in the pale gray light of early morning, thinking about a little boy singing to himself in the sand while he built something out of almost nothing. Building it with complete seriousness, treating every wall like it mattered, not worrying about whether the whole thing would hold, just placing each piece with care and attention and faith that the next piece would work too, and the next. She thought about Noah's castle and what it would look like by morning. Gone, probably. Taken by the tide. All that careful work, the walls, the towers, the addition he'd added in the last hour. The shell doorway he'd been so proud of washed back into the ocean like it had never been there. She wondered if Noah knew that would happen. She suspected he did. She suspected he'd build another one anyway. She lay there in the pale morning light, thinking about what kind of person looks at something temporary and still decides it's worth building perfectly. What kind of father teaches his son to be that person? And she thought quietly, in the way thoughts sometimes arrive before you're ready to say them out loud, that she had spent 15 years building things that were supposed to last forever. And she had not in a very long time built anything she actually cared about losing. She drove to Unit 7 on a Tuesday night, not Monday, She'd spent Monday talking herself out of it, sitting at her desk in San Francisco running through the logic of why a CEO does not show up unannounced at a distribution facility at 11 o'clock at night, why that particular impulse should be examined and set aside in favor of something rational. She had a full calendar. She had a CFO waiting for a decision on the Carrington fallout. She had Marcus sending careful emails every 4 hours that said nothing alarming, but meant everything was alarming. She talked herself out of it until Tuesday afternoon, when she found herself staring at a quarterly performance slide for Unit 7, and realizing she was looking at numbers that had never, not once, in the 17 months since Adrian Brooks had worked there, translated in her mind into an actual person driving an hour to a beach so his son could have a good Saturday. She texted Marcus at 4:30. "Hold everything Wednesday. Don't ask." She left the city at 9. She wore dark jeans, a plain gray pullover, her least identifiable shoes. She'd pulled her hair back simply. She was not going to fool anyone who looked closely. She had the kind of face that ended up in business magazines, and people remembered it, but she wasn't going in there announcing herself either. She was going to walk in, say she was doing a routine overnight audit, and keep her mouth shut as much as possible. The facility was 20 miles south of the city, tucked between a recycling center and a rail yard, in a neighborhood that the city's economic development plans always mentioned and never reached. She'd driven past the general area before without knowing it was there. She pulled into the lot at 11:14. The building was enormous. She'd known the square footage from the reports, but knowing it and seeing it were different things. 40,000 square feet of corrugated metal and loading bays lit up from the inside like something alive, trucks pulling in and out of the back end with a regularity that didn't stop for the hour or the cold or anything else. She sat in the car for a moment. Then she got out. The night supervisor's name was Dennis, and he was a stocky man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, who came out to meet her in the parking lot with the expression of someone who had been told an executive was coming and had been hoping it wasn't true. "Ms. Sterling." He shook her hand with the particular firmness of someone trying not to look nervous. "We weren't expecting. Marcus said it was an audit team." "It is an audit. I'm the team tonight." He blinked. "Right, of course. We have an office, or I can get you set up with the floor reports." I want to see the floor." Another blink. The actual floor." "The actual floor, Dennis." He walked her in. The sound hit her first. She'd expected it to be loud. She knew distribution centers were loud, but the specific quality of the sound wasn't something the reports had prepared her for. It was a kind of layered, constant roar, made up of conveyor belts and forklifts and the metallic percussion of packages, moving through sorting systems, all of it happening simultaneously, at a pace that felt from the middle of it slightly faster than human. And the people moving through it, dozens of them at nearly midnight, were moving at that same pace. Not rushed, not panicked. The efficient, practiced movement of people who had calibrated themselves to this rhythm over months or years, whose bodies had learned to live inside this particular tempo. She walked through it all with Dennis half a step behind her, trying to narrate useful things she already knew from the reports, and she let him talk because it gave her cover to look. She saw a woman in her 60s operating a scanning station with the automatic precision of someone who'd done this same motion 10,000 times. She saw two young men running a secondary sort line together, talking in the brief spaces between movements, laughing at something. She saw a man she couldn't identify eating a sandwich standing up beside a support column because there was nowhere to sit, and presumably not enough time to find somewhere. She saw the equipment bay. It was in the northeast corner of the facility, a large sectioned-off area where the mechanical systems lived. Conveyor mechanisms. Forklift charging stations. The sorting machine that processed packages through the primary line. A wall of tools, organized with a precision that she recognized as the work of someone who cared about the order of things. She saw Adrian before he saw her. How was on the far side of the bay on his back, halfway underneath a conveyor mechanism that had clearly been giving someone a problem. His legs were visible from the knee down. One hand was visible holding a wrench. She could hear faintly under the facility noise the specific focused sounds of someone working through a problem methodically. "What's going on with that one?" she asked Dennis. "That's the secondary conveyor. It's been throwing misalignment errors since last Thursday. We had the repair vendor out. Monday, they said it needed a part that wouldn't arrive until the end of the week, and we'd have to run reduced capacity in the meantime. Dennis paused. Adrian Brooks Maintenance. He told the supervisor he thought he could get it running without the part. We told him the vendor said it wasn't possible. Another pause. That was 3 hours ago. From underneath the machine without any preamble. It's possible. I'm doing it. Dennis cleared his throat. He, has very good hearing. Adrian slid out from under the machine. He was in his work clothes, dark pants, a Sterling Logistics shirt that had a tear along the left shoulder he'd clearly sewn back himself, and he had grease on his hands and a look of concentrated focus on his face that didn't shift much when he stood up and saw her. He looked at her. She looked at him. 3 full seconds passed. Vivian. Not a question. Not an exclamation. Just her name placed in the space between them while he worked out what it meant that she was here. Adrian? You work for... He stopped. Recalculated. She could actually watch the recalculation happen on his face. You don't work for Sterling Logistics. No. He looked at Dennis, who made a face that communicated everything while saying nothing, and looked back at her. You're the Sterling. Yes. Something moved through his expression. Not anger, not the eager scramble to rearrange himself that she expected from employees who suddenly realized they were talking to the CEO. Something more contained than either of those. He looked at her for another moment, the way he'd looked at her on the beach, like he was deciding something. Then he turned back to the conveyor. I've got another 40 minutes on this, he said. If you're here to tell me to stop and wait for the vendor, I'd rather hear it after I'm done, because it's going to work. Dennis made a sound that was not quite a word. Vivian crossed her arms. Show me what you're doing. He showed her. Not in the performative way that people showed executives things, not with the particular mix of eagerness and anxiety that came from knowing someone important was watching. He showed her because she asked, and because the work was straightforward enough to explain while he did it. The secondary conveyor had a tracking mechanism that kept packages centered through the sort process. It had been thrown off by a worn guide roller, the part the vendor wanted to wait for. What Adrian had figured out was that the wear pattern on the roller was uneven, concentrated on one side, which meant the center of the roller was still functional. He was reorienting the mechanism to use the undamaged portion and compensate with an adjustment to the belt tension calibration. I explained this while doing it. Flat, precise, completely without performance. The vendor's not wrong that the part needs replacing. But the part doesn't need replacing tonight. The machine needs to run tonight. He reached back under the mechanism. These are 2 different problems. How long have you been a maintenance tech? At this facility, 17 months. Before that, I worked heavy equipment at a construction operation for 4 years. You have a background in mechanical engineering. A pause from under the machine. I have a background in figuring things out. She looked at the tool wall. The organization was deliberate, not just hanging tools on pegs, but grouped by function, sequenced by frequency of use. There were handwritten labels on some sections, updated clearly over time, written in the same hand. Someone had thought hard about how this space worked and had kept thinking about it as things changed. You organized this. It was chaos when I started. Couldn't find anything. Costs time when you can't find things. You did this on your own initiative. Seemed obvious. She looked around the bay more carefully. There was a log on the workbench, a physical notebook, not a digital system that she picked up without thinking. She expected a maintenance log. What she found was more than that. It was a running record of every equipment issue in the facility for the past 14 months, organized by type, with notes on resolution time. Parts used, patterns observed across issues, and in a back section, a set of proposals for preventive measures that would reduce failure rates. She read for longer than she meant to. Did you submit this to your supervisor? The maintenance log, it's standard. Not the maintenance log, the back section, the preventive protocol proposals. A longer pause. He slid out from under the machine. He looked at the notebook in her hands. He was careful when he answered. I gave Marcus, the floor supervisor, a summary version back in October. He said he'd pass it up. Did he? I assumed so. Nobody told me otherwise. She looked back at the proposals. Clear logic. Specific recommendations. Cost projections. She would have paid a consultant $40,000 to produce and gotten worse output. Nobody actioned them, she said. Not an accusation. Just a fact following the trail of her own failure back through the chain. He absorbed this without reacting. Then they didn't get passed up. The machine made a sound, a settling, resolving sound. He glanced at it, walked over to a control panel, and ran a diagnostic sequence. Numbers moved across the screen. He watched them with the focused attention of someone reading a language they'd taught themselves. There. Quiet satisfaction in his voice. That's running. Dennis walked over, looked at the screen, looked at Adrian, looked at the screen again. That shouldn't be possible until Friday. I know. The vendor said. The vendor was solving a different problem than the one we actually had. Adrian wiped his hands on a shop cloth. We needed it running tonight. That's what I did. Vivian put the notebook back on the workbench. She thought about the quarterly reports for Unit 7. The performance numbers she'd read for 17 months without thinking about what produced them. The facility that consistently exceeded equipment uptime metrics without her ever asking how. She was looking at how. She stayed for 2 hours. She told Dennis she was observing operations for a general audit, which was true in the sense that she was observing, and it was certainly generating information. She walked the floor. She watched the sort lines. She asked questions of people who looked at her with the careful uncertainty of employees who didn't know whether to be honest or careful, and she did her best to look like someone who wanted honest. Mostly, she kept track of Adrian. Not in a way she thought he noticed he was working, dealing with 2 additional minor issues that came up during her time there, talking with other maintenance staff about a forklift that was behaving inconsistently. But she watched the way people related to him. How the younger guys on the floor came to him with questions. How the woman from the scanning station stopped him during a break to show him something on her phone, and he looked at it and laughed with her genuine no hierarchy in it. How the floor supervisor deferred to his read on equipment problems without seeming to notice he was deferring. I wasn't a technician working in a facility. He was the person the facility quietly depended on, and he was working the night shift injured. She noticed now what she hadn't seen before. The way he held his left shoulder slightly differently than his right. The micro adjustment he made without thinking every time he reached above his head because he couldn't afford not to. Just before 1 in the morning, she was standing near the secondary loading bay when he came up beside her. You should probably tell me, he said, what you're actually here for. She turned. He wasn't accusatory. He looked exactly like a man who had decided to ask a reasonable question and was prepared for a reasonable answer. I didn't know you worked here when I drove down. I want to be clear about that. Okay. I found out Sunday night. I pulled up the employee database. Something flickered in his expression. Not surprise exactly. More like he was adjusting to the actual shape of the situation, replacing what he'd assumed with what was real. So you looked me up? Yes. And then you drove down? Yes. He considered that for a moment. Why? This was the question she hadn't fully answered for herself, so she was honest about that. I'm not entirely sure. I've been in this company for 15 years, and I look at facilities like this from reports and spreadsheets, and I realized I'd never actually looked at them. And I think... She stopped, tried again. I think meeting you made me aware that I was missing something. I'm not sure I can explain it better than that right now. He looked at her for a long time. That's a real answer, he said finally. It's the only one I had. He nodded, leaned against the wall beside the loading bay, arms crossed, looking out at the floor. She stayed where she was. My shoulder, he said without her asking. You noticed. I did. Pulled it 3 weeks ago. Rotator cuff probably. Can't get it looked at yet. Can't. She stopped herself from completing the sentence the obvious way. The way that would have sounded like accusation when she had no standing for that. How long can you work through it? As long as I need to. That's not how rotator cuff injuries work. I know how they work. A beat. I also know how my rent works, and Noah's after-school program, and the debt from when my wife. He stopped himself. The way people stop themselves when a door they opened leads somewhere they didn't mean to go in front of someone they don't fully trust yet. She didn't push. The floor noise filled the space between them. Conveyors and forklifts and the constant rhythm of the night shift, moving things from one place to another, building the throughput numbers she read from her penthouse without ever thinking about the shoulder it cost. I'm sorry, she said. For the shoulder, for whatever else. For the whole situation I'm standing in the middle of right now that I should have had visibility on a long time ago. He looked at her sideways. You apologized to me on the beach too. I seem to keep doing that. You don't seem like someone who does it much. I'm not. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Adrian. She said it carefully. I looked at the proposals you gave to the floor supervisor in October. He went still. Those are good. That's serious operational thinking. That's not maintenance tech work. It's just observing patterns. No, it isn't. I've paid consultants significant money to produce analysis that didn't reach the level of what you wrote in the back of a notebook. Don't minimize it. He was quiet for a moment. Nobody minimized it, he said carefully. Nobody even read it apparently. That's on me. That's a failure of my structure, and I'm not going to dress it up. She looked at him directly. But I'm reading it now, and I have questions. He turned to face her fully for the first time since they'd started talking. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen on the beach. A kind of guarded alertness, like a person who has learned that when things start sounding like an opportunity, they should check first for what's attached to it. What kind of questions? The kind that should probably happen in a proper conversation, not at 1 a.m. in a loading bay. He studied her face. What do you want from me, Vivian? She appreciated the directness enough to match it. I want to understand how this facility actually operates, and then I want to understand what it would look like if the people who knew it best were the ones making decisions about it. That's a diplomatic answer. It's also the true one. He looked at her for a long moment, that same careful look from the beach, the one that evaluated without performing evaluation. She had the sense that he was very good at telling the difference between people who said real things and people who said things that sounded real, and that distinction mattered to him in a way that went beyond professional interest. I get off at 6, he said finally. I have to be at Noah's school by 7:30. I'll be gone by 5. Then I think our proper conversation is going to have to wait. I know. A pause. I'll be back, she said. Okay. She turned to go, then stopped. The shoulder. When's your next day off? Thursday. I'm going to have someone contact you about getting it looked at. A sports medicine clinic. It'll be, she chose the word deliberately, covered under our standard employee benefits adjustment process. There won't be paperwork that looks different from any other claim. He opened his mouth. She got there first. It is not pity. It is a benefit that should be accessible to you. And that isn't because our coverage documentation is genuinely terrible, and I know that, and I'm going to fix that as a company-wide thing. This is not about you specifically. She could see him working through it. Is any of that true? The part about the documentation being terrible. Yes, completely. The part about the fix being you specifically. She paused. Also yes. But it won't look that way by the time it gets to you. He was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. She nodded. Good night, Adrian. Good night, Ms. Sterling. She walked out through the loading bay into the cold night air and sat in her car for a while before she started it. She thought about a notebook full of proposals that had sat for 7 months in a dead-end chain of command, while the man who wrote them showed up every night and fixed things that weren't supposed to be fixable and didn't complain about any of it. She thought about her company, her empire, the thing she'd spent 15 years constructing with tremendous precision and intelligence and effort, and how much of it was built on people she had never met, solving problems she had never seen for wages that didn't cover a doctor's visit for a shoulder. They'd hurt keeping her machinery running. She started the car. She drove back to San Francisco, thinking the whole way, and by the time she reached the bridge, something had solidified in her that she recognized as the sensation of a decision that wasn't going back. She went back Thursday. She went back during the day shift, which was different from the night shift in every way. Noisier in some places, quieter in others. Different people, different rhythm. She met the day supervisor, a woman named Carla, who had been with Sterling Logistics for 9 years, and who looked at Vivian with an expression that said she had opinions and had learned to hold them carefully. Vivian asked her to hold them less carefully. They talked for an hour and a half in Carla's small office, while the facility ran around them, and Vivian learned more about how Unit 7 actually operated in that conversation than she had from 2 years of quarterly reports. Not because the reports were dishonest, but because they measured what they measured, and what they measured had been chosen by people who didn't know what they were missing. She asked about Adrian. Carla leaned back in her chair and said nothing for a moment, with the care of someone deciding how honest to be. He's the best technical mind in this facility. Probably the best I've worked with in my 9 years here. He also pulls double shifts twice a week and hasn't taken a sick day in 17 months, and everyone on the floor knows he's working through something with his shoulder, and nobody says anything about it, because he'd rather work hurt than whatever the alternative looks like to him. Has he been considered for a supervisory role? I recommended him for the floor lead position 8 months ago. Carla said it flatly. It went to someone else. I was told it was a budget decision. Vivian made a note. Is the person it went to doing the job well? Carla looked at her with great neutralness. He's doing fine. But. There is no but. You asked me a question and I answered it. Vivian looked at her for a moment. This woman was very good. I appreciate the discretion, but I need you to understand that I'm here because things in this facility are being handled by someone who doesn't know what they're doing, and that someone is me. And the only way that changes is if people like you say the actual true thing, not the careful version of it. Carla studied her. The person who got the floor lead position is doing fine, she said. Adrian Brooks would have transformed it. That's what I thought. She left Carla's office and walked the floor again. She was starting to know the geography of the place where the bottlenecks formed, where the space was underused, where the work patterns had evolved in ways that the physical layout hadn't caught up to. She found Adrian in the equipment bay at the end of her walkthrough. I was working on the forklift she'd heard about Tuesday night, its hood open, his attention fully inside it. He heard her coming. She was beginning to understand that he always heard things coming and looked up without the shoulder adjustment that she now recognized meant it hurt when he moved too fast. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he agreed. Did the clinic contact you? This morning. And I have an appointment next week. He looked at her with that careful assessment. You didn't have to do that. I know. You did it anyway. The documentation really is terrible. I wasn't lying about that. Something shifted in his expression, not all the way to a smile, but adjacent to one. Carla told me you spent 2 hours with her this morning. She's excellent. She's been trying to get someone to hear that for 9 years. Vivian put her hands in her pockets, looked at the forklift, looked at him. I want to bring you in for a conversation with my operations team. I want you in the room when we talk about what's not working at the facility level. Not as a representative or a symbol of anything, as the person who understands what's actually happening in these buildings. He set down the tool in his hand, looked at her directly. Vivian, what is this? She held his gaze. It's me trying to do something right, maybe a few years later than I should have. I have a job, a real one. I'm not looking for. I know what you're not looking for. You made that clear on the beach. You made it clear in that breakfast place. She took a breath. I'm not offering you charity. I'm not trying to rescue you from anything. I'm telling you that you've been doing work for my company that's worth significantly more than how it's been classified, and I want to correct that. I was quiet. You barely know me. I know what's in that notebook. I know what you did to that conveyor. I know what Carla said about you, and I know what I've watched you do on this floor, and I don't need to know more than that to know I've had the wrong person in the wrong role for 17 months. And that's a problem I have the ability to fix. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside the equipment bay, The facility moved in its constant rhythm. Packages and people, and the mechanical breath of a system that kept going regardless of what happened inside this conversation. "And what if I say no?" He asked it genuinely without heat, like he actually wanted to know. She answered genuinely. "Then I go back to San Francisco. I use what I learned from Carla and from these visits to make changes to how this facility is structured, and how the benefits documentation works, and how proposals get tracked through the chain of command. And you keep your job with absolutely no repercussions. None." She held his gaze. "I'm not the kind of person who punishes people for not doing me a favor. I understand if you don't know that yet. But it's true." He looked at her for a long time. Then he picked up the tool. "The forklift needs another hour," he said. "I can come find you after," she breathed. "I'll be with Carla." "Okay." She turned to go. "Vivian." She stopped. "Noah asked about you, on the way home from the beach." He said it to the forklift, not to her. "He wanted to know if you were a nice person." She stood still. "What did you tell him?" A pause. "I told him I wasn't sure yet." That was honest. It was. She stood there for a moment. What would you tell him now? He still didn't look up from the forklift, but something in the set of his shoulders changed, a small, almost invisible thing. "I'd tell him I'm starting to think so," he said. "I'd tell him the jury's still out." She left before he could see her smile. She was not someone who let people see that. But she kept it the whole walk back to Carla's office. The meeting happened on a Friday morning 3 weeks after her second visit to Unit 7. Vivian had spent those 3 weeks doing something she almost never did: preparing. Not preparing the way she normally prepared. Absorbing reports, memorizing numbers, walking into a room already knowing every answer before anyone finished asking the question. She prepared by listening. She went back to Unit 7 once more. She visited 2 other facilities. She sat with Carla for another hour on a phone call that ran 40 minutes past what she'd scheduled. She pulled every maintenance log from every facility for the past 2 years and read them the way Adrian had read that conveyor, not looking for what she expected to find, but looking for what was actually there. What she found made her quiet in a way that Marcus noticed and didn't comment on, because Marcus was smart enough to know when silence was a sign of something working. She'd built Sterling Logistics on efficiency, on the precision of systems, on the belief that if you built the right structure, the structure would produce the right outcomes, and your job was to maintain the structure, not to understand every individual piece of it. That belief had taken her from a regional carrier with 40 employees to a billion-dollar operation with 11,000. It had also meant she'd gone 15 years without walking into a loading bay at midnight. She didn't make a drama out of what she was discovering. She wasn't built for self-flagellation. It consumed time and produced nothing. She just took what she was learning and let it change her understanding of what needed to change. And then she made a list, and then she started working through the list. Adrian was on the list. Not at the top, because the top was about systems and structure. But in the conversation, she knew she needed to have about what the operations of this company could look like if the people who actually understood the operations were the ones designing how they ran. She had Marcus reach out to him through proper channels. She wasn't going to do the thing where the CEO texted an equipment maintenance tech directly, because that had its own kind of power. Imbalance she wasn't interested in creating. The message was simple. Ms. Sterling would like to continue the conversation we began at the facility. Would you be available for a meeting at headquarters Friday at 9 a.m.? Travel and parking will be covered. Adrian had replied through Carla. He'll be there. Jacquier. He arrived 12 minutes early. She knew this because Marcus told her, and because she could see the small lobby from her office if she angled her chair correctly, which she was doing and which she would never admit to doing. I was wearing a button-down shirt. Dark blue, pressed the kind of shirt a man wears when he wants to look like he took something seriously without looking like he was trying too hard. He carried nothing. No folder, no bag, no props. He sat in the lobby chair without pulling out his phone and looked at the building around him with the same calm, taking things in attention she'd first noticed on the beach. She made herself wait the full 12 minutes before she had Marcus bring him up. She made herself wait because there was a version of herself that wanted to go down to the lobby and get him personally, and that version needed to slow down. He walked into her office and looked around at once the lighthouse desk, the floor-to-ceiling glass, the ocean visible in the distance, and then looked at her with the same level expression he'd used in the loading bay. "Quite a view," he said. She was aware, and she was certain he was aware of the particular weight those words carried between them. "Sit down, Adrian." He sat across from her, not on the edge of the chair, the way nervous people did, not leaning back the way people who wanted to seem powerful did. Just sat in it, completely himself. "How's the shoulder, mate?" "Better. The clinic was good. Doctor said I caught it before it became a surgery situation." "A beat." "Thank you." "How's Noah?" Something changed in his face, that specific involuntary softening that happened when someone asked him about his son. "He's great. He's been asking when we can go back to the beach." He looked at her. "He talks about you." "About me?" "You showed him where to move back from the water. He told his whole class that a lady taught him about sand." Something close to a real smile. "He described you as the tall lady who was blocking Dad's view." She laughed. It surprised her not that she laughed, but how easily it came. "That's fair. He's a fair kid." She opened the folder on her desk. Not to hide behind it, she left it open to the side, visible to both of them, everything on the table. "I want to talk to you about a role. Before I do, I want to be very clear about a few things." He held her gaze. "I'm not offering you this because I feel sorry for you. I am not offering you this because of what happened on the beach, or in that restaurant, or because of anything personal between us. I am offering you this because in 30 years of being in this industry, I have very rarely found someone who understands operations the way you do, and I'd be an idiot to leave that where it is." "Okay. I also want to be clear that this conversation stays between us until you make a decision. I'm not going to create pressure by making it public. If you walk out of here and decide no, that's your answer, and nothing changes." "You said that before. About no repercussions." "I meant it then. I mean it now." He nodded. She turned the folder so it faced him and slid it across the desk. "Operations Supervisor Unit 7, which I know sounds like a lateral. It's not lateral. It's 4 levels up from where I am. The title is unit-specific for now. The role is bigger than the title. I want you managing the maintenance team, working with Carla on floor operations. And this is the part I need you to hear. I want you reporting directly to my regional director with an open channel to my office for operational issues." He looked at the folder. She could see him reading, not skimming, actually reading the role description she'd written herself, which Marcus had politely noted was unusual because CEOs did not typically write role descriptions. "The salary," he said, "is on page 3. She watched him turn to page 3. He was still for a moment. "That's what the role is worth. Not what I think you'll accept. What the role is actually worth." She kept her voice even. "I'm aware of what you're currently making. The gap is embarrassing to me. I'd rather it not be a point of negotiation." He looked up at her. "You're serious?" "Adrian, I don't have a sense of humor about operations." He looked back at the folder. She gave him the silence to read it properly, which took several minutes, and she used those minutes to look at the ocean outside her window and think about what she would do if he said no. She hadn't fully answered that question for herself. "There's a section here about a family support provision," he said. "Yes. Healthcare fully covered for dependents. After-school program reimbursement. Flexible scheduling accommodation for single parents." He looked up. "That's not in the standard Sterling Logistics benefits package." "No. You wrote this specifically for..." "I wrote it because it should have been in the package for the past 5 years, and it wasn't, and I needed somewhere to start. You're going to be the first person who benefits from it, but you won't be the last." She held his gaze. "This is not charity wrapped in policy language. The policy is real. I've already sent it to HR for company-wide implementation. The timing is what it is." He was quiet for a long moment. She could see him doing what he always did, that careful internal process that didn't rush itself, that took the situation as it actually was, and not as he wanted it to be, or feared it might be. "What do you actually need from me?" he said finally. Not what the folder says. What do you actually need? She respected this enough to answer it directly. I need someone who can tell me the truth about what's happening in my facilities. Not the version that goes through 5 management layers and arrives at my desk cleaned up and made palatable. The actual truth. She leaned forward slightly. I've been running this company on reports and metrics, and I've been missing things. Not accidentally, structurally. I built structures that protected me from the truth, and I've been calling that efficiency. A pause. I need someone who has lived inside those structures and understands exactly how they fail, and who is not afraid to tell me. That's a dangerous position to be in, telling the CEO her structures fail. Only if the CEO punishes people for it. I don't. That's what a CEO who punishes people for it would also say. She almost smiled. Fair point. I can't prove it to you in advance. All I can tell you is that I tore up a $200 million deal this month because a man called me sweetheart, and that should tell you something about how I respond to being condescended to versus how I respond to being told the truth. He looked at her for a long moment. I heard about the Carrington deal. Everyone heard about the Carrington deal. The people on my floor were talking about it. Some of them were nervous deal falling through what it means for the company. A beat. Some of them thought it was the right call. Which were you? I didn't know the details. He paused. Now that you've told me the details, I think I'd have done the same thing. Something settled between them. Not agreement exactly. Recognition. The role, he said. I have conditions. She hadn't expected that word. She found she liked it. Tell me. I want it understood clearly in whatever documentation exists that I'm in this role because I'm qualified for it. Not because I know the CEO. Not because of anything outside my work record. He held her gaze steadily. I need the people I'm going to be working with to understand that from day one. I need to earn their respect the way I've always earned it, which is by doing the work. If this looks like a favor, I can't do this job. Agreed. The position will be posted internally with your application and qualifications. You'll go through the standard review process with the regional director. I will not be involved in that process. You're going to let a hiring process happen that you already know the outcome of. I'm going to let a process happen that produces a legitimate record, yes. He thought about this. Second condition. Go ahead. The preventive maintenance proposals from October. I want them formally reviewed by your operations team and responded to. Not implemented, automatically reviewed. Seriously considered. If they have problems, I want to know what the problems are. His voice was careful, but certain. Those ideas came from watching this facility for over a year. They deserved a real answer, and they didn't get one. If I'm going to be in a room where I'm expected to bring you real information, I need to know what you do with it. She picked up a pen. Done. I'll schedule the review in the next 30 days. You'll be in the room. He absorbed this without reaction, the way he absorbed most things, taking it in, making sure it was real, before he let himself respond to it. Third condition. She waited. If it doesn't work if I'm in this role, and I find that the honest truth creates problems, or that what you said about how you use information turns out to be different in practice than it sounds right now, I need to be able to go back. Back to Unit 7, back to my tools, without this conversation hanging over it. She understood what he was asking. He was asking for an exit that didn't cost him what he'd built. He was asking for a promise that his dignity would still be intact if this went wrong. Because the one thing Adrian Brooks had never stopped protecting through everything was his dignity. If it doesn't work for any reason, you go back to Unit 7 at your current new salary with no reduction and no explanation required. In writing. She held his gaze. I'll have legal draft that guarantee as a separate document today if you want. He breathed. Slowly. The way someone breathes when they've been holding something a long time. Okay, he said. Okay, you want the document. Okay to everything. A pause. Yes to the document. She picked up her phone. Marcus, I need the guarantee document we discussed drafted and ready by end of day today. She set it down. It'll be in your email by 5. He sat back in the chair, looked at her across the lighthouse desk. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask. Why me? The real reason, not the operational version. She considered lying. Not dishonestly, just the softer version, the one that was entirely true, but omitted the harder thing. She was very good at that version. She decided not to use it, because you told me I was blocking the view, and you meant it. And nobody had said a true thing to me in so long that I didn't recognize it when I heard it, and that scared me. She held his gaze. I've been surrounded by people who manage me, who tell me what I want to hear because their jobs depend on it, who have learned to route around me instead of through me because I am not easy to deal with, and I know that. A pause. You had nothing to gain from me. You didn't know who I was. You just told me the truth because it was the truth and you didn't even think it was significant. How was quiet? That's it, she said. That's the whole answer. He looked at her for a long moment. That look, she'd come to recognize, the one that evaluated without performing evaluation. My wife used to do that, he said. Just say the true thing, right out, no calculation. His voice was completely even the way it got when he was talking about something that lived in a place where he'd learned to be careful. She thought I was too serious. She used to say I needed to remember that most things weren't as heavy as I made them. Was she right? Probably. Yeah. He looked at the window at the ocean in the distance. She would have liked you, I think. She had no patience for people who weren't straight with her. What was her name? Diane. He said it plainly, without flinching and without performing the not flinching. She sounds like someone worth knowing. She was the best person I've ever met. Simple, stated like a fact. She'd tell me I was being stubborn about the breakfast thing, by the way. On the beach. A small private smile. She'd say, Adrian, someone offered you a kindness. You accept the kindness, you say thank you. She'd be right. She was usually right. The smile faded into something quieter. Noah has her eyes, and her way of just talking to people, like there's no such thing as a stranger. Vivian thought about Noah at the beach, introducing himself to the passing 3-year-old with total diplomatic confidence. I noticed that about him. He doesn't know yet that the world is complicated. A pause. I'm trying to give him as long as possible before he has to find out. The office held the quiet for a moment. A real quiet. Not the silence of two people who had run out of things to say, but the silence of two people who were sitting inside something real and didn't need to fill it. Then Vivian said, I'd like to meet him again. Properly. Not accidentally on a beach. She said it carefully. If that's something you'd be comfortable with, at some point. No rush. He looked at her. He'd like that. Another small pause. He described you to his teacher. Apparently you're quite the character in his version of the beach story. The lady blocking the view. The lady blocking the view who knew about sand. He almost smiled. You're practically a hero in his version. She laughed again and again. It surprised her with its ease. He started the role 6 weeks later after the internal posting ran, and the regional director completed the review process with exactly the outcome Vivian had anticipated and stayed completely out of. The day he started, she was in Seattle for a board meeting. She'd planned it that way deliberately. She didn't want to be there. She didn't want his first day to be shadowed by the knowledge that the CEO was watching from somewhere above, waiting to see how it went. She wanted him to walk in and find Carla and Dennis and the day shift and the equipment bay and the work, and let it be his on its own terms. She texted Marcus, Don't send me anything about Unit 7 today. Marcus texted back, Understood. She sat through 4 hours of board meetings in Seattle, thinking about what a man in a blue button-down shirt was doing on a loading floor in California. She did not tell herself this was something other than what it was. About what a man in a blue button-down shirt was doing on a loading floor in California. She did not tell herself this was something other than what it was. The preventive maintenance review happened 3 weeks into his new role. She flew down for it. Sat in the Unit 7 conference room. A small, windowless room that smelled like burned coffee and old carpet, with her regional operations director, her head of facilities, Adrian, and Carla. Adrian stood at the whiteboard. She had seen people present to her hundreds of times. Executive presentations with polished slides and rehearsed transitions, and the particular choreography of confidence that people performed in rooms with power. She had sat through enough of those to know the difference between someone who understood what they were talking about and someone who understood how to talk about something. Adrian understood what he was talking about. He walked through the proposals without drama or performance. He explained the pattern he'd identified, the relationship between specific maintenance events and operational throughput loss, and showed the calculation he'd done on what preventive intervention would cost versus what the failures were currently costing. He acknowledged limitations in his data. He asked questions he didn't have the answers to. He was precise about what he knew and clear about what he didn't. Her head of facilities, a careful man named Robert, who had been with the company for 12 years, asked good questions. Adrian answered them directly. When he didn't have an answer, he said so and said how he'd find it. When Robert pushed back on one of the projections, Adrian didn't defend it. He picked up the pen and said, "Show me where I'm wrong." And they worked through it together at the whiteboard, like two people trying to get to the right answer, rather than two people trying to win. She watched this happen and felt something she could only describe as profound relief. Carla caught her eye across the table, said nothing, but her expression said everything. After the meeting, walking to the parking lot, Robert fell into step beside Vivian. Where has that man been for 17 months? Fixing equipment in the bay. Robert shook his head slowly. 3 of those proposals should be implemented company-wide, not just here. The pattern he identified on conveyor maintenance isn't specific to this facility. I know. You saw it too. The moment I read the notebook. She kept walking. We're going to be making some structural changes to how facility-level information reaches the operations team. Adrian's role is part of that, but it's not the whole thing. Robert was quiet for a moment. How did you find him? She thought about a beach, about a worn-out blue towel and a faded gray shirt, and a man who hadn't looked at her twice. He found me, she said. I just showed up after. She didn't see him outside of work during those 6 weeks. She thought about it. She caught herself thinking about it in the specific way that she caught herself doing things she needed to look at directly, instead of sideways, checking in on the thought, acknowledging it, deciding what it was. She liked Adrian Brooks. She respected him in a way she rarely respected anyone. She thought about his son with a frequency that was disproportionate to the amount of time she'd spent with him. She thought about Diane, a woman she'd never met, and what it meant to lose someone like that, and still show up on a beach trying to give your kid a day that was just a day. She thought about all of this carefully, and then she went back to work, because that was the right thing to do while he found his footing in a new role, and while their professional relationship was still establishing its own terms. She was not going to complicate things before they had solid ground to stand on. But she thought about the beach, and she thought about the way he'd laughed when Noah shrieked at the cold water, and she thought quietly in the early mornings before her day started, and she was still the version of herself that hadn't put on the armor yet. That was a good day. The first time something went wrong, it went wrong fast. 6 weeks and 4 days into Adrian's new role at 7:40 in the morning, her phone rang. Not Marcus, the regional director. We have a situation at Unit 7. She was already on the highway. She made herself drive the speed limit. What had happened was this. A contract logistics client, Meridian Freight, one of Sterling's top 5 accounts, had filed a formal complaint with her legal team the night before. They alleged that the changes Adrian had made to the secondary sort sequence in Unit 7 had resulted in a delay in their shipment processing during the transition week. The delay was real 48 hours on one batch of freight during the reconfiguration period, which Adrian had flagged to the floor supervisor in advance and documented clearly. The complaint characterized this as negligence. They were requesting a financial credit, and the part that made her drive harder, suggesting they would reconsider the relationship if the personnel responsible were not held accountable. Personnel responsible. She understood what that phrase was doing there. She pulled into Unit 7's parking lot at 9:15. Adrian was already in the conference room with the floor supervisor and the regional director on video call. He had a printed copy of every document related to the sort sequence change in front of him, organized in chronological order. She could see from the doorway that he'd been there for a while. He looked up when she walked in. His expression was even, controlled. But she could see under the control the thing that was happening for him. The particular gut-level fear of a person who has accepted a risk and is now watching it potentially cost him what he was trying to protect. She sat down. "Walk me through it," she said to him. Not to the regional director. To him. He walked her through it. Every decision, every communication, every document, every timestamp. The delay had been real. The documentation of it. The advance notice to the floor supervisor. The client-facing flag that should have gone through account management but hadn't because of a communication gap between operations and client services was also real. The delay was planned, he said. It was disclosed. The timeline hit exactly what I projected. The communication failure is on me. I flagged it internally and assumed it would be handled upstream. I should have confirmed it was communicated to the client directly. The regional director on the screen said carefully, "Meridian is a major account." "I know what Meridian is," Vivian said. "Their request that we take action on. I heard what they requested." She looked at the documents, looked at Adrian. The delay was disclosed in advance and documented. The sort sequence change improved throughput by 14% after implementation. The communication EP is real, and it belongs partly to operations and partly to client services, and we're going to fix that process. She looked at the regional director's face on the screen. "Tell Meridian's account manager I'll speak with them personally on Monday. We'll offer a service credit for the inconvenience of the transition period. We will not be taking action against the personnel involved." Silence on the video call. "Vivian," the regional director said carefully. "Meridian specifically. I heard what Meridian specifically said, and I'm telling you what we're specifically going to do." Her voice was completely flat. "Is that clear?" "Yes." "Good, thank you." She ended the call. She and Adrian were alone in the conference room. He looked at her across the table. His hands were flat on the documents in front of him, not gripping them, just resting there like he was staying connected to what was real. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "The decision was correct. The implementation had a process gap. The process gap is fixable. Burning the person who made the correct decision is not how I run this company." He looked at her for a long moment. "Meridian's going to push back. Let them push. I've been dealing with people who use relationship leverage to control personnel decisions for 30 years. It's one of my least favorite things, and I'm very good at not tolerating it." He absorbed this. "What if they walk? Then we find out what this company's values actually cost." She looked at him steadily. "I'd rather know that now than spend the next 10 years compromising every time a major account decides their preferences override how I treat people." Something happened in his face that she hadn't seen before. Not the guarded assessment. Not the careful evaluation. Something more open than either of those things. Something that happened when a person absorbs a truth they weren't sure was going to be true. "The third condition," he said quietly. She nodded. "This is what that looks like," she said. "When it gets tested. You were right to ask for it, and it's yours. That has not changed." He looked at the documents in front of him. "I should have confirmed the client communication myself." "Yes, you should have. And you know that, and you'll build it into the process and it won't happen again." She paused. "That's all that needs to happen with that." He sat back in his chair, let out a slow breath that carried a lot of weight with it. "You know," he said, "when I walked into that conference room this morning, I spent about an hour thinking I was going to be handing back the folder. The one with the salary on page 3. That one." She looked at him across the table. "You're not handing it back." He looked at her. "No," he said. "I'm not." Outside the conference room, the facility kept running. The conveyor Adrian had fixed without waiting for the vendor. The sort lines moving at the improved throughput his proposals had helped produce. 11,000 employees in 14 facilities moving things from one place to another, building the numbers she read from her penthouse. She sat in the small windowless conference room that smelled like burned coffee and understood that the number that mattered most in this building was 1. The one person who had told her the truth when he had nothing to gain from it. Who was still even now telling her the truth. She thought she probably owed him more than a salary on page 3. She thought she was just beginning to understand what she actually owed. Meridian didn't walk. Vivian had been right about that, though she hadn't been certain there was a version of events where Thomas Carrington's ghost showed up in the form of a logistics account manager, deciding that principle was less important than revenue, and she'd prepared herself for that version. She'd run the numbers. Meridian represented 6% of Unit 7's throughput volume. Losing them would hurt. It wouldn't break anything, but it would hurt, and the board would ask questions she'd have to answer with something other than because it was right. But Meridian's account manager, a practical woman named Sandra, who had been in the logistics industry for 25 years and had dealt with more than her share of CEOs who said one thing and did another, had gotten on the phone with Vivian on Monday morning and listened to what Vivian actually said, and what Vivian said was this: the delay was documented and disclosed in advance. The process gap that let it reach you without proper communication is being corrected this week. The operational improvement that came out of the change is real, and it's going to benefit your freight moving forward. I'm offering you a service credit for the transition inconvenience. What I am not going to do is take action against the person who made the correct call, because your team didn't like being inconvenienced by a process that ultimately serves you. Sandra had been quiet for a moment. You know, most CEOs would have just blamed the ops guy and moved on. I know. You're not most CEOs. I'm working on it. Sandra had taken the service credit and said nothing more about personnel. The account stayed, and word of the conversation moved through the company's internal channels, the way things always moved through internal channels faster than anyone intended, carried by people who needed to know that the ground they were standing on was what it claimed to be. Carla called Vivian the following Wednesday. People are talking. People always talk. They're talking about the Meridian thing, about what you said. A pause. Adrian hasn't said anything, he's not that kind of person. But people know, and it's changing something on the floor. Changing how? People are there standing up straighter, I think. That's the only way I can describe it. Like they just found out the building has better bones than they thought. Carla's voice was careful. A woman on the night shift, she's been here 7 years. She came to me yesterday and asked if it was true that you were reviewing the benefits documentation. I told her yes. She cried, Vivian. She stood in my office and cried because she's been trying to get coverage for her daughter's therapy for 2 years and kept hitting walls in the paperwork. Vivian was quiet. Send me her file. I'm not sending you her file so you can... Carla, send me her file so I can make sure she's not still hitting walls in the paperwork, that's all. Another pause. Her name is Rosalind. She's been here since before you bought this facility. Thank you. She found the file. She fixed the paperwork problem. She did it through proper channels and made sure it didn't look different from any other benefits correction. Because she understood by now from Adrian, without him ever telling her directly, that being helped in a way that made you visible as someone who needed help was its own kind of cost. She was learning to be useful without making it a story. It was harder than it sounded. 4 months into Adrian's role, the board meeting happened. She'd known it was coming. The Carrington fallout had settled, but not disappeared. $200 million didn't disappear quietly. And there were 3 board members who had been waiting for the right moment to have a structured conversation about what they called Vivian's decision-making framework. What they meant was that they wanted to know if she was still the person they'd trusted to run this company, or if something had shifted. Something had shifted. She knew it. They probably sensed it. The question was whether what had shifted was a problem. She walked into the board meeting at 9 in the morning, prepared for the version of this conversation she'd been running in her head for weeks. She had her numbers. She had her performance data. Unit 7's throughput was up 11% since Adrian's proposals had been implemented across the facility. 2 other facilities were running the same preventive maintenance protocols and showing early positive results. The benefits restructuring had reduced turnover at 3 locations, by a margin that would make itself visible in the next quarter's labor cost report. She had the numbers. What she hadn't fully prepared for was Gerald Park. Gerald was 71 years old and had been on her board since the beginning. One of the first investors. One of the people who had believed in her when believing in her required more faith than evidence. She trusted his read on things more than almost anyone's. And Gerald sat at the far end of the table with his hands folded and waited until everyone else had asked their questions before he said anything. Vivian. He let the room quiet down. I've been watching you build this company for 15 years. I have seen you in rooms where every decision had a cost, and you made them anyway. I have never in those 15 years seen you make a decision I couldn't follow the logic of. He paused. I want you to explain the logic of the last 6 months to me. Not the metrics, not the performance data, the actual logic. She looked at him. She could give him the polished version. She was excellent at the polished version, the strategic narrative, the framework, the decision architecture that made everything look deliberate and forward-looking. She'd been giving polished versions in boardrooms since she was 28 years old, and they'd never failed her. She gave him the real one instead. I went to a beach in September because I needed 2 days of silence. I met a man I had no reason to talk to. He was sitting on a worn-out towel, watching his son build a sandcastle. And he looked at me the way people look at strangers, like I was ordinary, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. She kept her voice even. I found out he worked for me. I went to the facility at midnight and watched him fix a machine the vendor said couldn't be fixed without a part that wasn't coming until Friday. I read proposals he'd submitted 7 months earlier that nobody had forwarded up the chain. I talked to the woman who'd been running that facility for 9 years and learned more about how my company actually operates in 90 minutes than I had from 2 years of quarterly reports. The room was very quiet. I realized I had built something I didn't understand from the inside. I had systems that were protecting me from information I needed. I had people doing extraordinary work that was invisible to me because I had classified them as a function and stopped there. She looked at Gerald. The logic is that I was wrong about something significant, and I found out, and then I did something about it. Gerald was quiet for a moment. The Carrington deal, he said, was the right call. $200 million. He called me sweetheart to manage me. If I'd accepted that every person who works for this company, who has ever been managed by being condescended to, would have been right to expect the same from me. I'm not willing to be that company. Another board member, Harrison, who wore his skepticism like a well-fitted jacket, said, "This is a compelling personal narrative, Vivian. The metrics are also genuinely good. But you're asking us to believe that a chance encounter on a beach drove material operational improvements, and that's a difficult. I'm asking you to believe that I found a significant gap in how information reaches me, and I closed it. The beach is how I found the gap. How I found it is less important than what I did once I found it. And the man, Brooks." She looked at Harrison directly. Adrian Brooks identified operational improvements that are saving this company money every week. He is performing his current role at a level that makes the gap between his previous classification and his current one look even more absurd than it did when I corrected it. His presence on my operations team is producing results. I would have paid a consulting firm $200,000 to try to produce and probably gotten worse output. She paused. Is there a specific concern you want to name directly, Harrison? Because I'd prefer we have that conversation with the actual words. Harrison held her gaze. People are going to tell a story about why he's in that role. People tell stories. What's true is what's in the performance record. She looked around the table. I didn't build this company on the stories people told about my decisions. I built it on what my decisions actually produced. That hasn't changed. Gerald unfolded his hands and laid them flat on the table. The benefits restructuring cost, he said, will be offset within 18 months by reduced turnover. I have the actuarial projection if you want it. I don't need the projection. I need to know you thought it through. I thought it through. He looked at her. That long reading look that she'd been on the receiving end of since she was 32 years old, and he'd decided to bet on her. Good, he said. Then I think we're done. Harrison opened his mouth. We're done, Harrison, Gerald said with the absolute certainty of a man who had been in rooms for 50 years and knew exactly when a room was done. She drove back from the board meeting and called Adrian. She didn't do this often. She was careful about the line between professional and personal, careful about the power. Differential. Careful about not becoming someone who used access to him as a form of reward for herself. She called him when there was operational reason to call him, and she did not call him for other reasons. This was partly operational. Board meeting went fine, she said when he picked up. I wasn't worried about the board meeting. You knew about it. Carla told me. She tells me things she thinks I should know. A pause. How fine is fine? Fine is fine. The metrics held up. Gerald held the room. She paused. Your name came up. A beat of silence. What kind of came up? The kind where someone implies a question without asking it directly, and I answer the question they actually meant. And I told the truth. Your performance record makes the conversation short. He was quiet for the moment. Thank you for telling me. You would have found out through Carla anyway. Probably. A pause. She really does tell me things. She likes you. She liked me before I had a title. That's the kind of like that matters. Vivian was quiet for a moment, watching the city move past her window. How's Noah? The shift in his voice was immediate and involuntary, and she had come to rely on it the way that question always found the real version of him underneath whatever layer the day had put on top. He lost his first tooth yesterday. Which one? Bottom front. He's been wiggling it for 3 weeks. He came to wake me up at 6 in the morning holding it in his hand, looking like he'd found gold. A pause. He wanted to know if I thought the tooth fairy had a logistics operation. She laughed. What did you tell him? I told him probably yes, and probably a very efficient one given the volume. A beat. He thought about it and said she probably needed better route optimization. He's not wrong. He's really not. And there was the warm private laugh that she'd first heard on the beach. He asks about you, by the way. Still. He wanted to know if you were coming to the beach again. She kept her voice neutral. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know, that it depended on a lot of things. A pause that felt careful on both sides. He said I should just ask you. She looked out the window. He's right, she said. Another pause, longer than the others. I have him next Saturday, Adrian said. We were going to go back down, same beach. His voice was measured, not uncertain, because Adrian Brooks was almost never uncertain but careful. If you wanted to come, as a person who might enjoy the beach, not as anything more complicated than that. Not as the CEO. Not as anything with a title. She thought about it for less time than she pretended to. What time? 9, but Noah will want to leave by 8:30. He thinks we need to get there before all the good sand is taken. Is that a real concern? I have not been able to convince him it isn't. Then I'll be there at 8:30. She was there at 8:22. She was wearing jeans and a plain white shirt and her least identifiable shoes, which were becoming a habit, and she had a terrible coffee from a gas station because she'd left early enough that nothing else was open, and she stood in the parking lot watching the ocean and feeling like a person who had no idea what she was doing in the best possible way. Adrian pulled in at 8:29. Noah was out of the car before it had fully stopped. He ran at her with the absolute confidence of a child who had decided the outcome of this reunion before it happened, and he stopped about 2 feet in front of her and looked up with the kind of examining look that children produce when they're checking to see if an adult is still the same person they remembered. You came. I came. Dad said you might not. Your dad was being cautious. Noah considered this. He's always cautious. Mom used to say he worried too much. He said it simply the way children say things that would take adults paragraphs to say, and then immediately moved on. I lost a tooth. I heard. Can I see? He opened his mouth and pointed to the gap with tremendous pride. That's a good one, she said seriously. Right in front. The tooth fairy gave me $5. Dad says that's a lot. Your dad is right. I'm saving it. He looked at the beach. Can we go? I need to check if the spot is still there. What spot? The spot where we built the castle last time. I want to see if the sand is still good there. Adrian came up beside her. He had the cooler and the towels and the same worn sneakers, and he looked at her with an expression she was learning to read the particular way his face settled when he was letting himself be present without preparing for the next thing. Good morning, he said. Good morning. Gas station coffee. Everything else was closed. I have a thermos in the cooler, actual coffee. I would like that very much. They walked down to the beach with Noah running ahead of them, checking the sand quality, with the serious attention of a structural engineer. The day moved the way. Good days moved without agenda, without performance, at the pace of a 6-year-old who had very specific ideas about how sandcastles should be engineered and was not interested in shortcuts. Vivian had thought she might feel awkward. She'd thought there might be a quality to the day that required management. The strangeness of being here in this context, outside the clean lines of professional interaction, where everything had a defined shape. She'd thought she might find herself reaching for the CEO for the armor of competence and authority that she wore so naturally she'd stopped noticing it. She didn't reach for any of it. She sat in the sand with actual coffee from Adrian's thermos and watched Noah direct a sandcastle construction project with the confidence of a man 3 times his age. And when Noah asked her to hold the bucket while he packed the sand, she held the bucket, and when he declared that the east wall was structurally compromised and needed immediate attention, she attended to it immediately. Adrian sat beside her, not close in a way that announced itself. Just beside her, the way people sit when they're comfortable with someone's proximity. At one point, Noah ran to the water, and they were quiet together for a while, watching him test the waves with his feet and shriek at the cold, exactly the way she'd seen him shriek at the cold the first time. You're good with him, Adrian said. He's easy to be good with. He's also not that easy. He asks a lot of questions. He doesn't stop talking. He has very strong opinions about sand. I like people with strong opinions. I've noticed, she smiled. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. What did you think when you first found out who I was at the facility? He was quiet for a moment. I thought it explained some things, the way you asked questions, the way you looked at the tool wall. A pause. And then I thought I needed to be careful. Careful how? Careful about what I let myself think the situation was. He was looking at the water. Because the situation could have been a lot of things. A CEO feeling guilty about something. A person doing a good thing for complicated reasons. Someone who thought doing one right thing meant she understood a whole category of experience she'd never lived. He said it without heat, without accusation. Just the truth, which was always how he said things. I needed to wait and see what it actually was. And now... He turned and looked at her. Now I think it's something I don't have a clean category for, which doesn't happen to me very often. She held his gaze. Me neither. Noah came running back from the water, dripping and triumphant, to report that there was a very good wave coming, and they needed to get ready for it. Adrian stood up and held out a hand to Vivian. She took it and stood, and he let go easy, natural, no announcement, and they followed Noah toward the water. Dong. The thing she hadn't anticipated was how much the day would teach her without trying to. She'd spent months learning Adrian Brooks through his work. Through the notebook and the conveyor and the meeting room and the board presentation she hadn't been in but had heard about from 3 different people afterward. She knew how he thought through problems. She knew how he treated people below him and people above him. She knew the quality of his judgment under pressure. She didn't fully know him until she watched him with Noah for a full day in the sand. She watched him notice the exact moment Noah's energy shifted from exuberant to fading. A transition invisible to anyone, not paying close attention, and quietly suggest they find a spot for lunch without making it about what he'd noticed. She watched him produce from the cooler an actual meal, sandwiches on real bread, cut fruit, small bags of crackers, a juice box, and a separate thermos of soup. Because apparently, Noah had a thing about soup. He'd made all of it. That morning before 8:30. You cooked this morning. Noah wanted soup. You can't bring canned soup to a beach. It's depressing. You made soup at 6 in the morning for a beach trip. It takes 20 minutes. She stared at him. What? He said. Nothing. You're doing the thing where you look at me like I did something unexpected. I'm doing the thing where I recalibrate my understanding of what morning preparation means. He handed her a sandwich. Eat. She ate. The sandwich was genuinely good turkey and something with a little heat to it that she couldn't identify and didn't want to stop eating long enough to ask about. She sat in the sand with soup that had been made before dawn and a sandwich from a man who didn't think any of this was worth remarking on and felt something settle in her chest that was so unfamiliar she spent a moment trying to identify it. It was contentment. Plain, uncomplicated contentment. Not the satisfaction of a deal closed or a problem solved or a number exceeded. Just this. Just the warmth of food that someone made carefully and the sound of the ocean and a little boy with a soup-covered chin telling her very specifically about the properties of good and bad sand. She hadn't felt this in so long she'd forgotten what it felt like. She thought she might have been trying to buy this feeling for years without knowing that was what she was buying toward. Late afternoon with the light going gold, and Noah asleep on the towel between them, exhausted into complete stillness. The way children collapse when they've fully used themselves up. Adrian said, I've been thinking about Diane. Vivian was quiet. Not in a sad way. In a, I've been thinking about what she would make of all this. He looked at the water. The job. The conversation with the board. You. He said the last word carefully, but not apologetically. What do you think she'd make of it? She'd make fun of me for the breakfast thing. She'd say I was being proud in the wrong direction. A small smile. She'd like you, I think. She didn't like people who weren't honest. She'd respect that you came to the facility yourself instead of sending someone. Vivian looked at the sleeping Noah. He really does have her eyes. You didn't know her. You said so. I believe you. He looked at her sideways. Yeah. Quiet. He does. A long silence. The good kind. I'm not in a rush, Adrian said. I want you to know that. With whatever this is, I'm not in a rush about it. I've got Noah. I've got a job that I'm still finding my footing in. I've got a lot of things that are new. He paused. I just don't want you to think I don't know what this is, that I'm not paying attention to it. I know you pay attention to things. I pay attention to everything. He looked at her. That can be a lot sometimes. I'm not afraid of a lot. I know. That's one of the things. He looked back at the water. I'm just, I wanted to say it, so it wasn't the thing we're not saying. She looked at the ocean. I appreciate that more than you know. I am very tired of things we're not saying. He almost smiled. Then we won't do that. No. Noah shifted in his sleep, turned toward his father without waking the automatic trusting navigation of a child who knew where safety was without having to look. Adrian adjusted the towel around him without thinking. The movement so practiced, so without effort, that it happened between one breath and the next. Vivian watched this. She thought about what she'd built in 15 years. The company, the penthouse, the lighthouse desk, the name that opened every door, and the particular loneliness of being in a room where your name did all the work before you arrived. She thought about what Adrian had built. A boy who turned toward him in his sleep. She thought it was probably the most valuable thing she'd ever sat next to. He's going to wake up and want ice cream, Adrian said. I know. I'm telling you now so you're not surprised when he presents it as a necessity. Is it a necessity? After a day like this, absolutely. He looked at her. There's a place about half a mile north. They do a sea salt caramel that Noah maintains is the best thing he's ever eaten. Then we should go. We should definitely go. She looked at the water one more time. The light on it now, something she didn't have a name for. Something that happened at this exact hour when the day was almost done and everything went briefly gold before the dark came. She thought this is the view. Not the ocean, not the light, not the expensive perfect angle from a penthouse window. This, the sleeping boy. The man beside her. The cooler with the soup thermos, the real coffee, and the good sandwich, and the conversation that said what it meant. This was what she'd been standing in front of on the beach that first morning without knowing it. And for the first time in 15 years, she was not blocking it. She was in it. The sea salt caramel ice cream was as advertised extraordinary. Noah ate his with the focused reverence of someone who understood that certain experiences deserved full attention, and he did not speak for the first 4 minutes, which Adrian told Vivian was a personal record. When he finally came up for air, he had ice cream on his chin and a look of profound satisfaction, and he said with complete seriousness, "You should come every time." Vivian looked at Adrian over Noah's head. Adrian looked at his ice cream. "That's a big invitation," Vivian said. "It's a good beach," Noah said simply, as if this settled the matter. "And you know about sand. That's a fair qualification. Also, you held the bucket right. Some people don't hold it right. I'll take that." Noah went back to his ice cream satisfied that the important things had been said. Adrian finally looked up and met her eyes, and there was something in his face that he didn't try to put away. A warmth that was quiet and real, and not performing anything, and she held it for a moment before they both looked back at their cones. They drove back separately. She followed his taillights for about 20 miles before their routes diverged. When she got home to the penthouse, she stood in the kitchen for a while without turning on the lights, and she thought about a 6-year-old who held the bucket evaluation as a legitimate measure of character. She thought he might be onto something. The changes at Sterling Logistics did not happen all at once. She'd learned enough by now to know that the changes that happened all at once were usually the ones that didn't hold. Real change moved at the speed of trust, which was slower than she was accustomed to, and faster than most people expected from a company her size. She moved deliberately. She fixed the benefits documentation company-wide and made sure it was communicated without fanfare through normal HR channels. She restructured the information flow from facilities to her operations team so that the chain between a floor-level observation and an executive decision had fewer places to get lost. She made Carla a regional operations consultant. Not a promotion exactly, more a recognition of what Carla had already been doing for 9 years without the title or the pay. She went to 3 more facilities, not all at once, 1 per month. She went the way she'd gone to Unit 7 without announcement at unexpected hours, looking for what the reports couldn't show her. She met a woman in Sacramento who had been routing packages around a recurring system error for 8 months because nobody had approved the fix. She met a man in San Diego who had designed a secondary staging process that was saving the facility 4 hours per shift and hadn't been shared with any other location because there was no mechanism for sharing it. She built the mechanism. She was not trying to become a different person. She understood herself well enough to know that the part of her that tore up the Carrington check was not going away, and she didn't want it to. She was precise, and she was demanding, and she had very little patience for people who dressed up their limitations as someone else's problem. Those things were still true, but she was also slowly and with effort becoming someone who understood that the building had other floors. That the view from the top was not the same as the view from the middle or the floor, and that the things you could only see from those other floors were not less real for being invisible from hers. Adrian had given her that. Not as a lesson, not as a gift with a bow on it, just by being who he was in front of her and letting her see it. 8 months after she offered him the folder, with the salary on page 3, she walked into Unit 7 on a Thursday afternoon and found a different facility than the one she'd walked into at midnight the previous fall. It wasn't the equipment. The equipment was the same. It wasn't the building or the layout, though some things had shifted based on Adrian's proposals. It was something in how the people moved equality in the way they occupied the space. Less braced, less like people waiting for something to go wrong, and more like people who believed that if something went wrong, there was a way to address it that didn't cost them more than the problem. She stood at the edge of the sort floor and watched it for a while without anyone noticing her. Then Rosalind walked past, the woman Carla had told her about. The one who had cried in Carla's office about her daughter's therapy coverage. She was working the primary scanning station, moving through the rhythm of it with the automatic confidence of 7 years, and as she passed a younger worker who looked uncertain about something. She slowed down without stopping and said something quick and specific that made the younger woman nod and adjust what she was doing. And then Rosalind kept moving without making a moment of it. Just ordinary competence passed from one person to another. Just the facility working the way a facility worked when people felt like they were part of it instead of inside it. She found Adrian in the back office he now shared with Carla. He was on the phone. She could see him through the glass, and he had the focused stillness of someone dealing with something real. She waited. He wrapped up the call and saw her through the glass and lifted his chin 1 minute. She waited in the hallway. He came out. Sacramento has the same misalignment pattern as the conveyor here last year, he said immediately. No preamble. I just got off with their maintenance lead. Different machine, same root cause. I want to send him the recalibration protocol. Do it. I wanted to check first. Adrian, do it. That's exactly what the protocol sharing system was built for. You don't need to check with me on this. He looked at her for a moment with the evaluating look. You say that, and then I skip the check, and someone decides I'm overstepping. Someone being who? Being anyone above me who didn't get a call before I started touching operations at another facility. She held his gaze. I'll send Robert a note today, establishing that the protocol sharing falls within your current role. In writing. She paused. Does that work? That works. Send Sacramento the protocol. He nodded. And then, because he was Adrian, how was Seattle? She'd been in Seattle for 2 days for a partnership negotiation. Fine. The other party was prepared and reasonable, which I always find mildly disorienting. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile. Disorienting. I'm calibrated for the Carrington version. When people are prepared and reasonable, I spend the first hour waiting for the part where they're not. That sounds exhausting. It is. It also means I'm very good at negotiations. I don't doubt it. He leaned against the hallway wall. How's Marcus holding up? Marcus is thriving. He started sending me one-line emails instead of 4-paragraph emails, which I take as a sign of growing confidence. Or growing efficiency. Same thing in Marcus's case. A pause. Are you coming down this weekend? His voice was easy, factual. They had gotten good at factual. Saturday, if the offer stands. Noah told me to tell you the offer always stands. Those were his exact words. He's been practicing them. She felt something move in her chest that she was by now no longer surprised by. Tell him I'll be there. The thing between them declared itself on a Saturday evening in November, 4 months after the beach day, with the ice cream. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the scene from a movie. It was the end of a day at Adrian's apartment, a small, clean place that he kept with the same deliberate care he applied to tool walls and maintenance logs, where they'd spent the afternoon with Noah, attempting to build a model aircraft that the box claimed was suitable for ages 8 and up, and which was clearly lying. Noah had fallen asleep on the couch at 7:30, with the instruction manual still in his hand, and the aircraft roughly 40% complete. Adrian had carried him to bed with the automatic ease of someone who had done this thousands of times, and when he came back out, Vivian was standing at the kitchen counter with 2 cups of coffee she'd made while he was gone, because she'd learned where things were in his kitchen in the way you learned where things were when you'd been somewhere often enough. He stopped when he saw her, not because it was surprising, because it was in the way that ordinary things sometimes became briefly extraordinary when you let yourself see them fully. She was standing in his kitchen in his light, and she belonged there in a way that neither of them had announced, but both of them had known for a while. He took the coffee. They stood on either side of the counter. Vivian, he said. I know, she said. I haven't. He stopped, tried again. Since Diane, I haven't let anything get close to this. I know. I'm not afraid of it. I want you to understand that. I'm not holding back because I'm afraid. He held her gaze with the directness that was so completely him, the thing she'd relied on since the first morning. I'm holding back because Noah is 7 years old and I don't bring people into his life without being sure. I would never ask you to. I know you wouldn't. A pause. That's part of it. The fact that you've never once pushed. The fact that you let it be what it is without trying to manage it. You'd notice if I tried to manage it. Immediately. Then I was never going to try. He looked at her for a long moment. He loves you, you know, in the way kids love people who take them seriously. He talks about you like you're already part of his landscape. Just there. The way things are when they've always been there. She was quiet. That means something to me, she said carefully. More than I know how to say without it sounding like less than it is. I know it does. He set down his coffee cup. I'm sure, Vivian. I want you to know that. I'm not almost sure. I'm not thinking it through. I've been thinking it through for 4 months. He almost smiled. I think at a certain point, the thinking has done everything it can do, and you just have to say the true thing. That sounds like good advice. I got it from someone. She put down her own cup. Then say it, she said. The true thing. He looked at her across the kitchen counter of his small, clean apartment, with his son asleep in the next room and 2 cups of coffee going cold between them, and he said, I want this. Whatever this is becoming, I want it. She breathed. Me too, she said. I have wanted it since you told me I was blocking the view. That long. Maybe longer. I think I knew something was different when you looked at me like I was ordinary. I'd forgotten what that felt like. He came around the counter. He didn't rush it. He moved with the same deliberateness he applied to everything. Not uncertain, not slow, just intentional. The way he fixed the conveyor. The way he read the boardroom. The way he held bucket when Noah needed someone to hold it. He stood in front of her. You are not ordinary, he said quietly. You looked at me like I was. I looked at you like you were a person. He held her gaze. That's different. She understood exactly what he meant. She reached up and put her hand against his face, just for a moment, the way you touch something real to confirm it's there. And he covered her hand with his, and they stood like that in the kitchen of a small apartment in California, while outside the world moved at the speed it always moved, and didn't notice what was happening inside this light. The year turned. November became. December became. The new year became a spring that arrived fast and warm along the California coast. Noah turned 7 with a party that involved a sandcastle building competition that he organized and judged himself, and the judging criteria were extremely specific and openly biased toward his own entry, and nobody minded. Vivian sat at the edge of the party and watched Adrian manage 8 7-year-olds with the same calm competence he brought to everything. And she thought about a man she'd assumed she understood when she walked across a beach and said, enjoying the view. She thought about how wrong she'd been. Not wrong about the surface of him. She'd seen the gray shirt and the worn cooler, and made her calculations, and they'd been accurate as far as they went. She'd been wrong about the depth. She'd been wrong about what lived underneath the surface, which was the only part that mattered. She had spent 15 years being very good at reading rooms. She had almost missed the most important room she'd ever walked into, because she'd been so sure she already knew what was in it. That stayed with her, not as shame. As a reminder she intended to keep. In March, she launched the Sterling Frontline Initiative, a formal program that created direct reporting channels from facility-level employees to the operations team, a rotating consultation seat at quarterly operations reviews for facility staff selected by their peers, and a mentorship structure for workers who demonstrated the kind of operational thinking that had been sitting invisible in notebooks for months before anyone thought to look. The press release her communications team wrote was polished and strategic. She rewrote it herself the night before it went out. The version she sent was shorter and said, in part, for 15 years, I built this company on the belief that good systems produced good outcomes, and I was right about that. What I missed is that the best systems come from the people inside them. We are late to listening. We are starting now. The board approved it unanimously. Gerald called her afterward. That was well done. It was overdue. Yes, but it was still well done. A pause. The man. Brooks. What about him? I'd like to meet him. She was quiet for a moment. Come to the next operations review. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant, Gerald, She smiled. Come to the operations review first. Meet him as the person who designed the preventive protocol that's now running in 9 facilities and saving us money every quarter. Let that be how you know him. After that, if you want to have dinner, I'll see if he's available. Gerald was quiet for a moment. You've changed, he said. I've corrected some things. Same result, different framing. Another pause. She would have liked him, I think. Diane, your mother. She always had good instincts about people. Vivian had not expected that. She held the phone and didn't say anything for a moment. Thank you, Gerald. Don't make it a thing. I'm old. I say what I mean. That seems like the right way to do it. He hung up without ceremony, which was exactly how Gerald always ended calls. She sat with the phone in her hand for a while after. Ciao. She told Adrian about the call that Saturday. They were at the beach, their beach, which was what it had become, without either of them deciding that's what it would be called. And Noah was 20 feet away, running a one-man operation that involved a complicated system of channels designed to redirect water from the incoming tide, which he had explained to them both in considerable engineering detail before commencing. He said she would have liked you, Vivian said. My mother. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Tell me about her. She was a practical woman. She didn't have time for pretense. She worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood, and she still showed up to every school thing I ever had, and she never made me feel like that cost her anything. Vivian looked at the water. She died before the company was what it is now. She knew I was building something, but she never saw it at this scale. Would she have been proud of the company? She thought about it honestly. She would have been proud of the work. She understood work. She might have had questions about whether the work was all there was. A pause. She asked me once when I was 32 and working 20-hour days whether I was building a life or just building a career. I told her there wasn't a difference. Were you right? She looked at him. What do you think? I think you've answered that question yourself by now. She had. Noah shouted something from his water management operation, a technical update that required both of them to come and look at a specific development in Channel 4, and they got up and went. The hardest conversation happened in April. Not between her and Adrian, between Adrian and himself. She knew it was happening before he told her, because she'd gotten good at reading him the way he'd always been good at reading everything else, the small adjustments, the weight that appeared in the set of his shoulders when something was working through him. She'd learned to give him space when that weight showed up because he processed things in his own time, and the worst thing you could do was reach into that process and interrupt it. He came to her on a Tuesday evening and said, I want to talk about the regional director position. She put down what she was working on. Robert had announced his retirement 3 weeks earlier. The regional director role overseeing all 14 California facilities was open. She had not brought it up. She was not going to be the one to bring it up. Talk, she said. I've been in the supervisor role for 10 months. It's not enough time. By whose measure? By mine. Tell me your concern. The concern is that if I take a regional director role 10 months into the first real leadership position I've held, I skip a step. And skipping steps looks like one thing from outside and feels like something else from inside. He held her gaze. I don't want to be the guy who moves fast because of who he knows. I've been that conversation once already. I don't want to be it again. She understood him completely. And she understood that what he needed from her right now was not reassurance. What he needed was the truth, because that was what they did. You're right that 10 months is fast, she said. You're wrong that fast means unqualified. The preventive protocol is running in 9 facilities. The frontline initiative design came substantially from your proposals. 3 facility supervisors in other locations have reached out to you directly for consultation, because your reputation has traveled without your name traveling with it. She paused. You're not being considered because of who you know. I haven't been involved in the succession process. That was deliberate. I know it was deliberate. Then you know I can't tell you to take the role. That's not my place. I know. What I can tell you is that the step you're afraid of skipping, you already did the work of it. You just did it in a role that was classified too low for what you were actually doing. She held his gaze. That's on me, not on you. He sat with this. If I take it, he said slowly, I need to earn it the same way I earned the supervisor role. The people in those 14 facilities need to know me from my work, not from anything else. Yes. That means I go to every facility. I meet every Carla. I read every maintenance log that exists. That sounds right to me. It's going to take time, real time. I'm not going to try to be impressive quickly. That's exactly the right approach. He looked at the table. Noah asked me last week what a regional director was. I told him it was the person responsible for making sure things worked right in a lot of places. He paused. He said, that sounds like you, Dad. A quiet beat. 7 years old. He's his father's son. He's his mother's too. He looked up. She'd tell me to stop second-guessing myself. She'd say, Adrian, you know you can do this, so do it and stop talking about it. Vivian said nothing. She let Diane's voice do the work. He breathed. I'll submit my name, he said. Good. And I'm doing it through proper channels. The application goes to HR the same way anyone else's does. I know. And if someone more qualified? Adrian. He stopped. Submit the application, she said. Then let the process work. He did. He got the role. Not because of her, she had genuinely removed herself from the process and let Robert's succession committee run it without interference, and she heard the outcome the same way everyone else did through official HR notification. She found out on a Wednesday afternoon, and she sat at her lighthouse desk and felt something she recognized as pride in the specific form it took when it wasn't about you. She called him. Congratulations, Regional Director. A long pause. It's a lot of facilities. 14. 14 Carlos. God willing. He laughed. The real one. From somewhere genuine. Noah made me a card, he said. He drew a picture of a man holding a very large building. The man has a cape. That tracks. I told him regional directors don't wear capes. He said the ones in his version do. A pause. He asked if you were going to be his dad's boss now. What did you tell him? I told him it was complicated. That's accurate. He said complicated was fine. He said you knew about sand, and that was more important. She sat at the lighthouse desk, looking at the ocean and feeling the particular fullness of a moment that had earned itself through everything that came before it. Tell him I'll see him Saturday, she said. He already knows. They went back to the beach in June, on the 1-year anniversary of the morning she'd crossed the sand toward a man on a worn-out towel and said 4 words she'd been paying for and profiting from ever since. She didn't mention the anniversary. Adrian didn't mention it. But they both knew. Noah ran ahead. He always ran ahead. He had opinions about the best approach route to the good sand, and he didn't slow down to share them, just executed them with complete conviction and expected the adults to keep up. They walked behind him. The same beach, the same light, the same ocean, doing what it always did. Moving, breathing, indifferent to everything except itself. And yet nothing was the same. She had come here a year ago in a designer swimsuit, feeling the specific luxury of anonymity of being nobody for 2 days. She had walked across this sand looking for something she couldn't name, which turned out to be something she already had and had stopped being able to see. She walked it now beside a man who had never stopped being able to see it. Do you remember, she said, what you told me that first morning? I told you were blocking the view. Before that, he thought, I told you my son had been talking about the sandcastle since Tuesday. You said you'd been waiting all week for a Saturday. You could actually get down here. She looked at him. I remember thinking this man drove an hour for a beach day, and he's talking about it like it's everything. It was everything. I know that now. She looked at Noah, who had already located the correct patch of sand and was beginning his assessment. I didn't know what that meant then, having one thing that was everything. What changed? She looked at him. You. Him. This. She gestured not at the ocean, not at anything specific, at the air around all 3 of them. I stopped blocking it. He reached over and took her hand. Not announced. Not a moment. Just his hand around hers, easy and warm, the way it had become in the months since the kitchen counter in November. The way things felt when they'd been true long enough that they didn't need to announce themselves anymore. Noah looked back over his shoulder and saw them. He considered this for exactly 1 second, with the practical assessment of a 7-year-old evaluating new information, and then he turned back to the sand. "Come on," he called. "I need someone to hold the bucket." They went. Adrian let go of her hand to pick up the cooler. She caught up to Noah and crouched down beside him and took the bucket when he handed it to her, and she held it exactly the way he required, and he nodded with the serious satisfaction of someone whose standards had been met. "You always hold it right," Noah said. "I've had good training." "Dad taught you." She thought about the beach a year ago, about a worn-out towel and old sneakers, and a man who hadn't looked at her twice. About a card that came back declined, and the quiet, unbreakable thing that lived underneath that. About a notebook full of proposals in the back of a maintenance bay. About a conveyor that couldn't be fixed until Friday and was running by midnight. About a little boy who had declared her part of the view. "Yeah," she said. He did. Adrian set down the cooler behind them. He looked at her over Noah's head, and she looked back at him, and nothing was said because nothing needed to be. The ocean kept moving. Noah kept building. The castle took shape in the sand the way it always did, carefully, imperfectly, piece by piece, with total faith that the next piece would hold. It was the most